The Carolina Panthers had all the confidence in the world as NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell sauntered to the podium at Union Station to announce their first overall pick in the 2023 draft. After years of floundering and frustration, the Panthers had finally found their savior, the consensus top quarterback available in a QB-rich draft. This was the guy who was going to lead the Panthers to glory, or so they thought. Instead, the Panthers quickly came to regret their decision, not only because of the incredible haul they gave up to acquire the first overall pick, but because the second overall pick, the QB they passed on, immediately blossomed into an NFL star. Everybody knew coming in that the 2023 NFL Draft would be a game changer. Unlike the previous year's draft class, which didn't have a single quarterback taken in the top 15, the 2023 class featured an unusual wealth of top-end quarterbacks. Bryce Young out of Alabama, CJ Stroud from Ohio State, Anthony Richardson out of Florida, Will Levis from Kentucky. And which long-suffering NFL franchise had their pick of the litter? The Chicago Bears. For the first time in 76 years, the Bears held the first overall pick in the 2023 draft, a consequence of their miserable 3-14 finish the season prior. That set a new franchise record for losses, by the way, and marked the Bears' 6th season with double-digit losses since 2013. But here's the thing. The Bears had used their 11th overall pick on a quarterback just 2 years prior. And although Justin Fields had been inconsistent, to put it mildly, through his first 2 NFL seasons, Chicago wasn't necessarily ready to move on from him. And that gave them options. They could trade Fields and use that pick on a successor, or they could hang on to Fields and swap that first overall selection for a bundle. Enter the Carolina Panthers. For years, ever since parting ways with Cam Newton, the Panthers had been completely rudderless, an organization going nowhere largely because they didn't have a quarterback. In fact, from 2019 through 2022, the Panthers had a different QB1 every year. Those quarterbacks were Kyle Allen, Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Darnold, and Baker Mayfield, and not the best versions of those guys either. So bottom line, the Panthers were determined to land one of the multiple franchise QBs available in the 2023 draft, and they were prepared to give up a lot to do that. Like, a lot. And about a month out from the 2023 draft, they managed to pry the #1 pick from Chicago. All it cost them was a historic package. In exchange for the #1 pick, the Panthers gave up their 9th overall selection in the 2023 draft, plus a 2nd-round pick in 2023, a 1st-round pick in 2024, a 2nd-round pick in 2025, and, just for good measure, DJ Moore, Carolina's leading wide receiver in each of the previous 4 seasons. It was a blockbuster to end all blockbusters. But now the Panthers had a decision to make, one that would shape the future of the organization, for better or for worse, for years to come. Which quarterback should they take? And really, it came down to 2 options, Young and Stroud, both of whom were tantalizing. Young was the first quarterback in Alabama's glorious history to win the Heisman Trophy, earning the award as a sophomore after finishing 2nd in the nation in passing yards and passing touchdowns. His accuracy, mobility, and off-the-charts intangibles made NFL scouts drool. And although he was undersized at 5'10", Young still seemingly had the makings of an all-pro quarterback. Now as for Stroud, he was a beast as well over his 2-year stint as Ohio State's starter. During that time, he threw 85 touchdown passes, breaking the Big Ten record for passing touchdowns in a 2-year span previously held by Drew Brees. Meanwhile, he also completed nearly 70% of his pass attempts, averaging 325 passing yards per game with an interception rate below 1.5%. Stroud could huck it, plain and simple. And seemingly, there was no wrong choice between the two. To that end, it was a foregone conclusion that whichever QB the Panthers didn't take would end up going 2nd overall to the Houston Texans, who had lost 13 games in consecutive seasons and desperately needed a successor to Deshaun Watson. But as draft day drew nearer, it became increasingly clear that the Panthers were leaning towards Young. And as then general manager Scott Fitterer later explained, that preference was cemented when Panthers brass went for dinner with Young ahead of his pro day. Apparently, the poise that Young showed at the dinner table convinced Fitterer that he could be their guy, the face of the franchise. And when the big day finally arrived, the Panthers had the utmost confidence in their decision.
With the first pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, the Carolina Panthers select Bryce Young, quarterback, Alabama.
Talk about getting to work. Carolina has needed a quarterback for a couple of years now. What are you bringing to this team?
Everything I have. I'm going to give everything to the franchise, to the organization, to the coaches, that believed in me and drafted me. And, I'm forever indebted for that. So everything I have, preparation, not just on Sundays, but throughout the entire week, I'm going to give it my all.
Sure enough, moments after the Panthers selected Young, the Texans drafted their quarterback of the future.
With the second pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, the Houston Texans select C.J. Stroud, quarterback, Ohio State.
So they do take a quarterback, and they do take C.J. Stroud out of The Ohio State University. The Buckeye chosen second overall.
You're getting emotional.
Yes, ma'am. This took a lot of hard work.
A lot of hard work, and you're going to a team that's looking for a new identity. Got a new head coach looking for a leader. What do you bring?
I'll bring me. I'll bring a man of God. I'll bring a leader. I'll bring somebody who's going to go to work every day and work their tail off. Somebody who comes from a winning tradition. Somebody who wants to win. And that's all I care about, man. So I'm going to be the best teammate, the best leader, the best quarterback I can be.
The die had been cast. Young to Carolina, Stroud to Houston. Both organizations had landed a cornerstone. But understandably, there was particular excitement about Young, the first overall pick. NFL.com lauded him as the best quarterback in the draft. ESPN proclaimed that Young will be the answer for the long-suffering Panthers. Here's what Shannon Sharp had to say.
I understand he's small in stature, but Skip, if you watch this kid play, he has it all.
The consensus, in other words, was that the Panthers had made the right call. Before long, however, it would become abundantly clear that they didn't. And their bold gambit to trade up for Young immediately became one of the most regrettable moves in NFL history. As you might expect given their pedigree, both Young and Stroud earned their team's QB1 jobs for the 2023 campaign out of training camp. The former beat out Andy Dalton, and the latter won the job over Davis Mills. Neither was being handled with kid gloves. They were getting baptisms by fire. But while Stroud had no issue with the heat, Young quickly found himself getting burned. In his much anticipated Panthers debut, on the road in Atlanta, Young got a rude welcome to the NFL. He totaled only 146 passing yards, completed less than 53% of his attempts, and threw a pair of interceptions in a 24-10 loss. It was a performance he himself described as unacceptable, though he vowed to learn from the experience. Only his next time out, he threw for just 153 yards, didn't connect on a pass longer than 14 yards, and lost a fumble in another loss to a divisional rival. And things just really didn't get better for Young or the Panthers. In fact, by the time their Week 7 bye mercifully arrived, Carolina was 0-6, and Young was averaging less than 195 passing yards per game, with a completion rate below 64% and a passer rating of 78.7, lower than the likes of Desmond Ridder and Kenny Pickett. And meanwhile, Stroud was crushing it in Houston. 6 weeks into the season, Stroud had thrown 9 touchdowns to just 1 interception, he was averaging almost 277 passing yards per game, and the Texans had already matched their win total from the season prior. Now here's where it gets really funky though. In Week 8, Young and the Panthers finally got their first win of the season, a 15-13 victory over, wait for it, Stroud and the Texans. And Young clearly outplayed his counterpart, recording what was then his highest single-game passer rating in the win. But if there was any optimism that that game could be a springboard for Young to salvage a so far underwhelming rookie season and reaffirm the Panthers' decision to draft him over Stroud, it quickly evaporated. From there, Carolina lost 6 straight games as Young's play went from shaky to awful. Over that 6-game skid, Young threw just 2 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, completed just over half of his pass attempts, and averaged only 165 passing yards per game. And Stroud, on the other hand, was seemingly energized by his loss to the Panthers. In his very next game, actually, Stroud threw for 470 yards and 5 touchdowns in a historic performance. And he just kept on humming. And as the season headed into the home stretch, the fates and the futures of the Panthers and Texans couldn't have looked more different. Carolina was still completely inept, with their franchise QB looking like a potential bust, while the Texans were a burgeoning behemoth with a bona fide stud under center. Speaking of which, after missing weeks 15 and 16 due to injury, Stroud returned just in time to propel his team to 2 straight victories to close out the season, helping Houston finish 10-7 and secure their first division title since 2019. Young, conversely, stumbled to the finish line. Over his final 2 games in 2023, Young racked up a whopping 206 passing yards with 1 interception and 1 fumble lost. The Panthers scored a grand total of 0 points over those 2 games. And ultimately, the 2023 campaign, the supposed start of a bright future in Carolina, was nothing short of a nightmare. At 2-15, the Panthers tied a franchise record for losses, and Young's play did not inspire confidence moving forward. All told, he finished the year with less than 2,900 passing yards, roughly 180 per game, with 11 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. And among the 28 QBs to start at least 10 games, he finished dead last in completion percentage, yards per pass attempt, and passer rating. And the icing on top of the Panthers' turd cake? Stroud took home Offensive Rookie of the Year honors after throwing for more than 4,100 yards and 23 touchdowns while posting a higher passer rating than Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. He also propelled the Texans to their first postseason victory in a half-decade, throwing for 3 touchdowns in a wildcard round beatdown of Cleveland. But as regrettable as the Panthers' choice of Young looked one season in, it somehow got even worse. 2 weeks into the 2024 campaign, after 2 miserable losses in which Young threw 3 picks and managed just 2 completions of more than 18 yards, the Panthers benched their ostensible savior, casting a cloud of uncertainty over Young's future in Carolina. Stroud, meanwhile, kicked off his sophomore campaign right where he left off, looking like a franchise quarterback and a future All-Pro. Could Young still turn it around and realize the potential that scouts were raving about in the not-too-distant past? Sure. It's absolutely too early to definitively say that the former #1 overall pick is a bust. Having said that, though, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single Panthers fan who isn't clamoring for a do-over, who wouldn't sell his soul to have Stroud running Carolina's offense. And if their respective careers continue on their current trajectories, the Panthers' decision to draft Young over Stroud could well go down as one of the worst moves in NFL history. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button.